So today I want to talk about White Forest with the Millennium cards in the Rage of the Abyss format. I previously covered the Millennium cards, and I was thinking that maybe there's a different usage you could get out of these now. So I want to go over the idea behind the deck, what it's supposed to achieve, why it's a little bit different to other versions of White Forest, and then I'll show you a sample combo to give you an idea of how it works. So first of all, yes, this is over 40 cards. I generally recommend that you don't go over 42 if you're in a deck that needs multiple cards to function for a combo. There are some exceptions in decks like these where almost everything is actually an engine piece, so you aren't necessarily decreasing the consistency of your deck if you add in a consistency card. Like if you're at 40 and you add in a prosperity to your deck obviously isn't getting less consistent. But the ratios still have to make sense, and the most important thing you have to think of is how does the ratio of non-engine to engine pieces change in your deck? So if I was playing Power Spell, generally speaking, the numbers that are comfortable are like 9 to 12. So here we have 10, 11, 12. I feel like if you're going above 40, you have to be at the higher amount of that. You're not playing enough to where you could be comfortably on hand traps. And so I feel like 12 is a lower end number of power spells you should be playing. Now I am counting Goat as a power spell. I'll get to that in a moment. And then for the rest of it, you want to play like as many good cards as possible, which, sounds obvious, but it means that, Wanted and Witch are kind of like the stars of the Azamina engine. And the Chengying package is also including Golem now. And the reason for that is because of Chengying. So I recently showed using Chengying in Centurion in my last deck profile, and that the value of it was kind of like, if you normal summon Primera and you get impermed, instead of having to pass if you don't have another extender, the Chengying is an 8, which plus 4 is 12 to go into Auxilia to continue your combos, but also because it searches itself, it gives you a true free discard off of the field spell. So it has real utility there as an extender. Now in White Forest, what I've shown before is that the Millennium cards are strong because if you open them, you can immediately force a Closed Heaven line and therefore an interaction from your opponent. Because remember, the Wave Hiking Caesar is not good just because the card is good. The card is good because you can get to it through Closed Heaven, which makes it broken because most decks can get to Closed Heaven very easily. This just happens to be regulated somewhat by the existence of Fuelos, because going through like a Closed Heaven line will give your opponent so many draws that a lot of Snake Eye decks, for example, are not even playing these or playing like the Wave Hiking line, and they're just going for a play with like Rabbit and Temple around Fuelos. And then because their extra decks are so tight now, they're often cutting the Wave Hiking package and just playing Desiree. Obviously that has interactions with Promethean Princess for them where they can negate the princess so they're not firelocked. For us, I feel like it makes sense to include this package because naturally you can get to it very easily with all of the engines involved in the deck, so there's a lot of functional redundancy. But the cards don't just like brick on themselves if you draw multiple pieces of engine. So what I wanted to do, to make a long story short, is show that not only if you draw one of these can you do like a Closed Heaven line and then use the rest of your engine for something else, but you can also do something new. So if you draw more engine pieces together, you obviously want your board to be better. You don't want to be punished for drawing more good cards just because they're redundant. And Chengying has some additional utility now in that Golem, which is a 6, can combine with a level 4 tuner to make a 10. The reason that you wouldn't normally do this otherwise is if you didn't have a way to reliably trigger the Chengying banish. So in this deck profile, I'm playing Wanted, which in your main phase, you can banish it from your grave, which means that you can trigger Chengying on your turn. So that's like more useful for breaking boards or for OTKing. And then with the Goat, which you're also playing with the Thrust, so you'll see this in the majority of your games, this card you can banish whenever you want. And so this is also a way to trigger Chengying. Now the cool thing about this is you may be thinking, well, for you to do this entire play and for Chengying to be good, don't you have to have access to Wanted or to Goat? Yes, but this is one of the reasons that functional redundancy is so cool. You don't have to go for the Chengying line at all. You can use these for other very useful things. So the Closed Heaven line is one thing. I think it's also probably worth playing just one generic level 12 synchro because this is an 8. Because there will be times where you don't want to go into Closed Heaven, or you could already do that very easily, and maybe you want something else, or you're trying to break boards, and you want the pop and the draw. And so Legatia is like a good way to get that done. Also kind of like a sleeper effect on this is your monsters with 2,000 or less attack cannot be destroyed by battle. So obviously this is not as good as Chaos Angel's effect, but if you have this on field, this is obviously hard to beat over because it's 3,500. It does protect, you know, random stuff like the SP, which is what Chaos Angel would normally be protecting anyhow. Or if you'd been floating stuff like an Stellar in your opponent's turn, and it would be helpful to keep that resource on the crackback. So yeah, the point is, you know, it's not just that you have to go for a particular line with this, but if you draw better, then your ceiling does go up. So it's functional redundancy at its best. A couple other things to note before I show you a combo line is that I feel like if you have more free summons in your deck, Skull Dread becomes more and more attractive. And that's mostly because post-siding, if you're going first, you would want to put in a bunch of floodgates into your deck if you could reliably draw them. But a lot of people are opting to not play stuff like Skill Drain now, not because the card is any worse, but just because it's less likely that you'll consistently execute the same game plan over and over when it's at 1. And I feel like those cards are a lot better if you can play something like Skull Dread. I mean, imagine you go first and you have a whole bunch of plays. This would obviously be way better in a breaker format, less good in a hand trap format. And you draw into, and you make Skull Dread, and then you draw 4. And, you know, maybe you draw into your Skill Drain, maybe you draw into like an Eradicator, or a D-Barrier that you didn't draw like Thrust to search for, or you couldn't Thrust because your opponent didn't activate a card effect or whatever. Like that is good. So yeah, that's the basic idea behind the deck. Last thing, I guess this is a level 8. It does technically work with Shrimp, but I think more likely than not, this will be either used for Closed Heaven or for Legatia. Okay, so let me show you a quick replay, and then this will just be a quick video, I think. So here we start with a not too unusual looking hand. Goat represents the 1-ish power spell, a hand that you draw. Here we start with Soldier. So Soldier searches box. We didn't start with box, so you know the hand could have been better. And we do like a very basic ladder where we're going into Diabel here. And I'm not showing you how you should be sequencing this, by the way. This is not safe sequencing. I'm just showing you what the end board looks like. It'd be the same, you know, you just would sequence it differently. So here you go into the Closed Heaven line where you get the Wave Hiking Caesar, and you have the Sword Soul Supreme Sovereign Chengying on field. So in this case, you have Diabel, which is standard. You have the Wave Hiking Caesar, which is standard if you're on a Fiendsmith version, and you would also normally have the Woes set. So depending on what you've drawn, like if you drew access to the Azamina engine, so in Rage of the Abyss format, that means you kind of had to have drawn Deception or Wanted or Witch, which is actually, if you're playing max copies of those, the vast majority of games. So it's very likely that you will have Azamina engine in most of your hands. But if you don't have that, or if you're not even playing it, then you do something like this. And or if you're playing the Azamina stuff, but you know that gets interacted with and it doesn't work, you know, you can still push through stuff because you have so much functionally redundant engine. Now, having a Seng engine at itself is less good in this deck because you can only use each of its effects once per turn, so it's not like you can place it as a continuous spell, special summon itself for a body, search the other one, and then use that as a continuous spell for fodder for your White Forest stuff. You can't do that. Whereas in the Centurion version, it can be any card that you discard off the field spell. So I think it's more important that it has a different target in this version of the deck, and that target actually does something. So the downside is that if you draw Golem, then, and you're not playing Wedju Temple, it doesn't have anything to search. So it's not like neg, it's not a brick or anything, but it's not plus, basically, which is like, you know, you're trying to spoil yourself with super optimal engine pieces, and so Golem isn't that if you're not playing Temple, but I don't think it's worth playing the Temple. So here you see that there's the standard setup where Woes has something in Grave that the tuner can shuffle back, and then there's also either an Esteller or an LZ in Grave, and because it's an Esteller, obviously you bring out the other one so that you cycle through both in your opponent's turn. And then just to show you that, like, when your opponent does something, let's just get something in Grave so that this can resolve properly. Here we can banish the goat, and this will trigger the Chengying. And so here the Chengying triggers, and then we get to banish 2 cards there. So yeah, just to double down, to make sure there's no understanding on this, you don't make the Chengying if there's no way to reliably trigger the banish. It's just an option that costs 1 extra deck slot that debatably warrants you playing the Golem or is more like an extra reason to play the Millennium stuff, aside from just the Closed Heaven line, which is really the reason that you would play them, in my opinion, beforehand. So anyhow, that's it for the video, and thanks for watching.